Hey everybody, this is Mr. Mob coming at you again with another APUSH video. We're taking a look once again at topic 8.4, looking at the U.S. economy after 1945. Previously we were looking at some immediate post-war challenges that are going to be emerging, challenges and opportunities I should say. In this video we're going to take a look at a little bit more domestic policy under the Truman administration. And a lot of this is going to be Truman, the Democrat, in the White House battling the Republicans in Congress during the late 40s and early 1950s. Now, understand that Truman comes into the presidency riding the wave of 12 previous years of Franklin Roosevelt, New Deal era dominance. And not only did Democrats control the White House, but they also control Congress. Republicans were clearly the minority party for, about 15 years or so. But as we mentioned in the last video, there's going to be some economic challenges when the war comes to an end. Things like increases in inflation, increases in labor strikes, all that kind of stuff. And when you add to the mix, kind of a historical tendency of, once one party and one kind of ideology kind of dominates for an extended period of time, there tends to be exhaustion over that and a little bit of a desire for something different. And those things are going to come together and allow the Republicans to gain control of Congress in following the 1946 midterm elections for the first time since, before Roosevelt was president. So note, whereas Roosevelt always had a pretty friendly Congress, Truman not necessarily. Something else that is going to be, changing as a result of the end of the Roosevelt era will be the ratification of the 22nd Amendment. Remember, prior to the 22nd Amendment, there were no rules per the Constitution in terms of term limits for presidents. Now, Washington will start the two-term tradition, which will then be replicated by a number of presidents, like Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Jackson, Grant, etc. But it still was only a tradition until Franklin Roosevelt, as we know, who will end up winning election 4 times and serving until his death. Many were concerned that this might start a precedent of future presidents keeping to run again and again and again until they die in office, which might be seen as a threat to democracy and a promotion of authoritarianism. So in 1951, we will see the 22nd Amendment ratified that will now formally, per the Constitution, limit the president to 2 terms or 10 years. The 10-year option is if a president comes into office following a vacancy and there's less than 2 years left in the term that they are filling in for. So be mindful of that. And of course, there's a little trick, a little tip to help you remember the 22nd Amendment. Remember, 22nd Amendment, 2 terms. 22nd Amendment, 2-2. See, easy way to remember that. Anyway. If we're continuing to take a look at some of the economic challenges, we mentioned previously that there's going to be a noticeable increase in labor strife. Once again, the economy's trying to kind of sort itself out now that the war is over. The government isn't buying goods and services nearly like it was during the war. You've got returning veterans trying to get jobs. You're seeing an oversupply of labor, which will drive wages down. And so you've got these things coming to a head. And now in 1947, with a Republican-controlled Congress, and some of America kind of wanting to put labor back in their place, so to speak, since, they kind of had this golden age of dominance during the Roosevelt years, we're going to see the Taft Hartley Act be passed. And this Taft is not William Howard Taft, the former president and Chief Justice, but rather Bob Taft, his son, also known as Mr. Republican. Anyhow, what this law will do, and note, it'll be passed over the veto of President Truman, is that it's going to allow states to outlaw what are known as closed shops regarding union membership. If you don't recall, a closed shop is a business that through, its contract, and this is usually through like intense negotiations or a strike or something like that. But anyhow, a closed shop is an agreement that in order for someone to become employed at that business, they have to join the union. For example, Kroger here in Ohio is a closed shop. You have to join the union to be able to work there. What this is saying is that states, if they want to outlaw closed shops, they have the right to do so. And many states will start to do that, particularly in the South and other areas of America that were not as historically friendly to labor, or maybe didn't have manufacturing as developed as you kind of saw in the Northeast and the Rust Belt areas. And so what this does is kind of mark the beginning of the end of the golden age for labor unions in America, and sort of a reset in terms of how much leverage unions are going to have now in states, for example, that don't allow for closed shops. So no, this is going to be a major blow to the labor movement, and it's going to have major ramifications even to this day. Now, we'll also see during this time period one of the more interesting and remarkable presidential elections in our nation's history, and that's going to be the election of 1948. Now, in 1948, Harry Truman is looking to get elected for the first time in his own right. Remember, he had been president now for over 3 years, but that was because Roosevelt had died early into his fourth term. Now Truman's looking for his own win as a presidential candidate. But this is going to come with tremendous challenges. Truman did not have nearly the built-in popularity that his predecessor Franklin Roosevelt had, even though Truman does get credit for ending the war with Japan in World War II. And there's going to be a number of policies that are going to kind of explain, why Truman's going to be in a very precarious spot politically, mostly within his own party. Truman, for many Democrats, will either be viewed as too liberal or not liberal enough. Remember, the Democratic Party for many, many generations, going back to the mid-1800s, was a party that was a coalition mostly made up of southern states and big cities, all right, like northern big cities like New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, things like that. And it was a coalition that has, been very, very successful, especially during the Roosevelt years. But Truman's going to make a very important decision that is going to challenge that coalition. Notably, Truman's executive order that will desegregate the entire federal bureaucracy, including the U.S. military. Southerners are going to be extremely upset at this. Southerners had, wanted to maintain a Washington, D.C., if you will, that was segregated and maintain that military segregated tradition. But now that is gone. Democrats in the South were worried that Truman, though Truman is from a southern state, remember, Truman's from Missouri, he's from a Jim Crow state, but still, though, Southerners are concerned following this executive order that Truman is going to start to begin to dismantle the Jim Crow way of life that had been defining southern states since the end of at least Reconstruction, and to try to protect themselves from an encroaching federal government in an attempt to protect from the destruction of a Jim Crow society. We will see a number of Southern Democrats split from the Democratic Party to form what's going to be called the States' Rights Party. The idea that let the states be able to dictate more of what they want in their own states, a lot of it based on racial policies. And their nominee for president will be South Carolina Senator Strom Thurmond, pictured right here. So this is going to represent, more conservative Democrats historically that felt that Truman was becoming too liberal, especially on matters of race. However, as I mentioned a moment ago, there's going to be some Democrats that feel that Truman didn't go far enough in terms of promoting, the continuation or the resurgence of a Roosevelt-style New Deal. And those folks are going to be led by this man, Henry Wallace. Now, Henry Wallace had been the vice president under Roosevelt prior to Truman becoming vice president. Wallace was dumped by the Roosevelt campaign in 1944's Democratic Convention for another term as VP, mostly because Wallace was seen as way too liberal, that he was, promoting more and more government control over things like healthcare and things in business and, the environment and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And he was just seen as too professorial, too liberal, too kind of out there for Roosevelt's liking. So Wallace is dumped. But note, there's still going to be a number of Democrats that kind of find themselves in this very, very solidly liberal perspective, progressive, if you will. And Truman wasn't cutting it for them. So Wallace, though not as popular as, say, Strom Thurmond on the Dixiecrat side, is still going to be a noticeable challenge to Truman. And if you look at this politically, usually if you're a major party and you have an independent faction break off, that's usually game over for you in a presidential election. But now Truman has two folks from his own party that have fallen off. This certainly looks like there is no way that Truman could possibly win re-election, especially given that the Republican nominee is popular New York Governor Thomas Dewey, that's pictured right here. Now, Dewey had run for president before 4 years earlier against FDR and gave Roosevelt the toughest of his four presidential campaign bids, though he did come up short. So the thinking was Truman is seeing two major splits in his own party's base of support, and there's a popular governor that has experience running for president as his main challenger. There's no way that Truman can win, or at least that's the popular wisdom. But you never want to totally count out Truman. Truman's an interesting character. Truman was someone that kind of viewed what was setting up here as a bit of a personal challenge, that his pride would not allow him to just accept defeat, even though it seemed highly likely. In fact, Truman's going to take this and move his campaign into high gear and begin to do one of these kind of old school whistle-stop tours that is really going to be taxing on him physically, but is going to be necessary for him to connect with the average American in city after city, state after state, small town after small town, in all regions of the country. Truman, over the course of the summer of 1948 and into the fall, seems to be, of the candidates, the one that is willing to work the hardest to win the job, or at least for his case, keep his job. And, that would be a good sign for Truman, but still, though, every pollster, every prognosticator still believe, though, that despite Truman's hard work and efforts, there's just too much up against Truman to be able to win. But Truman, at the end, pulls off perhaps the biggest upset in all political history, all American presidential election history. He will win. It will be remarkable. Take a look at where Truman is going to be getting a lot of support. Most of his support is going to be coming from the West. Parts of the Midwest, but mostly the West. Even the solid South is not solid like it normally would be. You see a number of states end up going for Strom Thurmond. New England is going to overwhelmingly go for Thomas Dewey. So through an interesting kind of patchwork of enough Midwest states, enough Southern states, and a lot of Western states, Truman's able to cobble together this victory. And of course, one of the most enduring images of this campaign is that it's so seemingly obvious that Truman cannot win that the Chicago Daily Tribune, in an attempt to be prepared for the next day, already puts into publication the headline showing what they knew was going to be happening, that Thomas Dewey, the Republican, would defeat Truman. But of course, that doesn't come to pass, and then you see this famous picture of President Truman with a big, big grin showing the folly of betting against him. Now, with re-election secured, Truman's going to try to make his mark as a solidly, Democrat president and, add upon the New Deal with his Fair Deal. This is an attempt to expand federal government to provide even more opportunities and protections for the American people, mostly with regards to health care and Social Security. From a Social Security perspective, Truman is going to be fairly successful in expanding the number of jobs that qualify for Social Security benefits, expanding those that can receive benefits based on permanent injury, or the children of those people that are disabled, spouses that have deceased, things like that. But Truman is going to come up noticeably short with his bold attempt at creating nationalized health care. Single-payer, government-paid health care was now starting to become popular in Western Europe and Canada, and Truman wanted to continue that, or wanted to bring that to America. However, intense conservative Republican opposition and heavy lobbying from the AMA, the American Medical Association, will thwart that from happening. But it does lay the groundwork for what is still today a major policy issue, healthcare. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye.